I'm going to say one more thing about the body. It's very important. This is for young people. Young people, let me just tell you something. I don't care what your culture says, and I don't care if you stand up and laugh at me as a dinosaur. Dating is unbiblical. It's ungodly, and it's done more to damage our culture than absolutely anything on the face of the earth. Now, it's a phenomenon that really only started like 100 years ago. Let's say there's 6,000 years of written history or something. Dating is something that's just started, and it's destroyed everything. Now, I just want to give you a few ideas. You know the story of the girl doesn't have a choice, right? And the boy doesn't have a choice, and it's time for the girl to get married, so Dad goes out, finds her a husband, he's as ugly as a toad, brings him back, she's got to marry him, and you say, well, Brother Paul, is that what you're talking about? Well, let's just stop here for a moment and see what the alternative is today. In what I just described, here's a father who, listen to me, young girl, your father knows 1 billion times more about the world than you ever even imagined existed. He really does. He's been there. He knows things he can't even tell you about. He's seen things. Believe me, I'm a dad. He goes out. Isn't anybody going to fool this guy? Isn't some little 16-year-old guy with pimples on his nose going to fool Dad? Dad walks out. Dad can see right through him. Dad doesn't have, Dad isn't seeing stars.
And most importantly, to know that when you first fall in love, the brain chemicals and hormones that get produced are the same hormones if you were taking cocaine. So it literally is like a drug high.
We will never, ever, ever be apart. If I was your boyfriend, never let you go. You are my anchor, never be alone.
We're seeing young couples whose marriages are being broken up. Half of all new marriages, as you know, in America fail within the first 5 years.
Things I wish I'd known before we got married. That is that falling in love is not enough for a sustainable marriage. What do you mean by that?
Well, I wish I had known that, Jim. And the reason the experience of falling in love is not an adequate foundation for marriage is it's temporary. We've studied it. It has a 2-year lifespan. That's the average. Some a little more, some a little less, but average 2 years you're in this euphoric state where you just feel like this is the most wonderful person in the world. There's nothing wrong with them. They're absolutely perfect.
Here's a father who, listen to me, young girl, your father knows 1 billion times more about the world than you ever even imagined existed. He really does. He's been there. He knows things he can't even tell you about. He goes out. Isn't anybody going to fool this guy? Isn't some little 16-year-old guy with pimples on his nose going to fool Dad? Dad walks out. Dad can see right through him. Dad doesn't have, Dad isn't seeing stars. His heart isn't going like this. He sees right off the bat this kid's worthless. So Dad's going to go out with 1,000 times infinitely more wisdom than you have and go out and find you a mate for life. Now, I'm not saying that's right. I'm just saying it's a lot better than the option today. What is the option today? The 16-year-old girl goes out, finds a little boy, brings him back, and Dad has to accept him. Which one's right? Neither one. I'll tell you something. The world will tell you that when you're around 11 or 12 or whatever, and you start recognizing there are people of the opposite sex out there, okay? And the world tells you, all right, it's time to go. It's time to start. Button's been pushed. Who pushed the button? I'll tell you who did. God. God pushed the button. But He's not telling them with that button it's time to start into a relationship. He's telling them it's time to prepare. He's showing you there is this wonderful thing out there now. You have to become a man. And you have to become a woman. I'll give you an example. I take my son. He's 4 years old. He's been shooting a bow now for a year. My bow that I shoot's got arrowheads on it that you have to put them on with a wrench because they're so sharp they'll cut your finger off. My little boy doesn't have those. Why? He's a little boy. When's he going to have those? When he's able to handle them. Little boys don't play with big men things. So in order for him to one day graduate to those arrows, he's going to have to become a man. And until then, he won't. So now he's got something to work towards, doesn't he? Because he can't play men's games while he's still a boy. What are we doing? Our boys never grow into men because we let them play the men games without the men responsibility. And men have dropped the ball in that they don't teach their children or their sons to make them men. Now, what happens? All right. Boy starts recognizing, wow, there's girls. Cool. Dad comes in and says, son, I see you just noticed that. Yeah. All right. Now for the next 5 or 6 years, your training begins. What kind of training? Change you from a boy into a man. When can you start thinking about being involved with someone of the opposite sex? I'll tell you. When you are man enough to guide them spiritually. When you are man enough to protect them physically. That doesn't mean you can fight better than everyone else, but you're willing to lay down your life. And when you can take care of them economically. That means if Dad's paying for the insurance on your car, you can't go out on a date. That is the first time you can start thinking about someone of the opposite sex, when you are able to assume all the responsibilities of a man. Girls, same thing. It's pathetic. I mean, my boy's 4 years old and there's already people coming up and saying, he's cute and my daughter. And I said, don't you even get near my boy. Leave my son alone. Don't you awaken love until it's time. All right, but girls, my wife has a wonderful article on our website. Just go to our website and get it. It's called Becoming Esther. How Esther had to go through all these beauty treatments and all this different stuff before she ever came into the king. Chotto takes that and goes into, okay, this idea of love has been awakened in you. You're a young teenage girl. What does that mean? That means that, hopefully you have a mother who is truly godly. Hopefully you have a church full of women who are truly godly. And you submit yourself to them and you learn to become a woman. You learn to take care of a man. You learn to do all the things you're supposed to do as a woman. And when you graduate is when the authorities over you say, you've graduated. Let me give you an example. I was 30 years old when I asked Chotto to marry me. I talked to her father. He said no. Because he was an unbeliever. He's Catholic. He didn't want his daughter marrying some evangelical missionary. He said no. He said, no, I don't want you seeing my daughter. I was 30 years old. I was director of an international mission society. Been around the world. I submitted to him. So don't talk to me about you're not going to submit to your parents, because I won't hear it. I submitted to him. 6 months later, he sends me a message. I have never in my life seen a man like you. I no more expected you to submit to me than a man on the moon. You have. You can marry my daughter. She'll never find another man like you. So don't talk to me about you're too old. You know nothing of authority, and knowing nothing of authority, you know nothing about God and how He works. Now, yes, that can be taken to extremes. And yes, your parents can even be wrong. But this is something you need to understand. You submit to your parents even if they're wrong, and God will deal with your parents. Because when that man said no to me, I went up to the 3rd floor there in the church and started to pray, and I knew God impressed upon my heart, son, stand and behold my power. I will fight for you.
Look, this quote here on the left, godly men are an absolute endangered species. And I just must reiterate something here. Not men who go to church. There are many men that go to church, and are absolutely godless and sleep around with their girlfriends and have multiple girlfriends. It is an unfortunate fact. I think Paul Washer says the devil also goes to church. So it's men that practice the Bible's principles in relationships and in everything else. Just to realize that you will have to go and look for godly men or a godly man to marry. You are not going to find them where the world finds them, in clubs and restaurants or bars or that kind of thing. You will have to go to specific Christian places, specifically also where Christian work is done, because those men there are actually putting their Christian theory into practice and not just going to church and small group like some club, but their Christianity is actually costing them something. Go and find your husband there.